Hello and welcome to this video about the contribution margin. I will first explain the theory and then go through all the formulas that are involved. This will be your introduction to contribution margin concept. Over in my right hand corner, you can see the different abbreviations I use for simplicity. Great. Let us start. The theory. The contribution margin is used to show why the operating income changes as the number of units sold changes. A tip: always remember all variable costs, otherwise your computation might become very wrong. So let's put this in a real life situation. The contribution margin allows companies to determine the profitability of individual products. For example, for their strategy. A low contribution margin could mean that you need to lower your variable costs or increase your price. Or in case you're a company with many products, you might want to altogether drop the product. An increase in your contribution margin helps cover fixed costs and cover operating loss. Great, so let's dig into the concepts very quickly. Your operating income is your revenues minus your variable costs, your total variable cost and your total fixed costs. This can also be written as revenues minus total cost. That is because, I'm sorry about the typo, that is because your variable cost plus your fixed cost equals your total cost. Also, the OI can be written as your revenues, if we open the bracket, minus your variable costs, minus your fixed costs. This is going to be very important later on, so let's keep it at that. So let's also just explain some minor concepts as well in case you don't know. Revenues equals your price times your quantity, and your variable cost, your total variable cost, will equal your quantity times your variable cost per unit. Great, now that we have the basic concepts, we can dig into the real stuff. Now, I'll give you the formulas for the contribution margin. The contribution margin equals your total revenues minus your total variable cost. In order to compute that per unit, we can say that the contribution margin per unit is equal to your selling price times your variable cost per unit. Now let's look at why that actually works. Okay, because we have to go back up here. When we take this part and we say, okay, if that part is the contribution margin and we want to get it per unit, we divide it by the quantity. Now, if we divide it by the quantity, we know that price times quantity is the revenue, so you're left with price. And we know that the variable cost is quantity times your variable cost per unit. So we're left with the variable cost per unit. So that's why it logically makes sense, which is why the algebra is very important. Now later on, you're also going to learn about the contribution method, and you're going to learn that we can put this back into this equation. And we said that your operating income equals your contribution margin minus your fixed costs. And lastly, logically, if you only have your contribution margin per unit, you take your contribution margin per unit and times it by the quantity sold to get your contribution margin. So really, the contribution margin is not such a difficult concept. There's one more thing that is important to know about the contribution margin, and that is the contribution margin percentage. I think some people call this also the contribution margin ratio, but I always call it the contribution margin percentage. So the contribution margin percentage is equal to your contribution margin, right, over your revenues. And now you might ask what the contribution margin percentage actually is. Well, it tells you how much you make for each dollar. So for example, if it's 40% or 2/5, that means for every dollar you make 40 cents. And then this goes towards covering all your costs. That is all for this very short video. Or actually no, there's one more important thing that I almost forgot to say. So we have to understand that we can look at the contribution margin in 3 ways. If your contribution margin is higher than your total fixed costs, if your contribution margin is equal to your total fixed costs, and if your contribution margin is lower than your total fixed costs. What does this mean? Well, here it means you're going to have an operating income. Here you're going to have a negative. You're going to have zero. You're going to have a break-even point. You're going to have zero operating income, zero profits. And lastly, you're going to have a negative here, an operating loss, or negative operating income is the same as operating loss. So just let me clear that up. When your contribution margin is greater than your fixed costs, you have income, you have a surplus. When they're equal, you have zero operating income. And when it's less than, you have an operating loss. So, in conclusion, your contribution margin needs to be higher than the fixed costs in order to make money profit. If they're equal, then the operating income is zero. If it's less, it's a loss. This is why companies will focus on their contribution margin as an important tool in understanding their costs and in a way to make profits. That's everything for this video. Thank you.